Good morning, everybody. This is Lisa Stone. I am sitting on the floor of my bedroom because my husband is actually doing a deposition on Zoom in the office, and so I had to come somewhere where I could shut the door and not be in earshot of what he's got going on. Before I bring Scott Handback online, I wanted to just say that we were scheduled to do this conversation earlier in the week, and in light of what's going on in our country right now and the unrest and the protests and everything happening, Scott and I decided it would be better to postpone this. However, the information that we're discussing is important and we wanted to get it to y'all, and I don't want to have anyone think that we are being insensitive to world events or U.S. events right now. We are certainly not. But at the same time, there are certain things that need to take place and conversations that need to be had. And one of them is what's happening with junior tennis. And I know that that is of interest to those of you in the Parenting Aces community. So Scott and I made the decision together to go ahead and have this conversation and get y'all the information that you need to help your kids get back on court, back in competition, and all of that. So I'm going to bring Scott on. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Lisa. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Sitting on the floor, so hoping my back holds out here.
Is that because you're in California now?
Yes, that's it. I'm the hippie. No, it's as I explained a second ago. It's just because my husband's in the office and I'm trying to not be in earshot and interrupt his deposition. So, but let's talk about, you're coming at us from your office, which is awesome. You were able to be back on your campus and back in your office, even though the tennis courts, as you told me, still are not available. But the reason we're having this conversation now is you've been on calls, multiple calls. I'm sure you're zoomed out with USTA about junior comp, what's happening with junior comp, what's happening with college recruiting, what's happening with the dissolution of so many college tennis programs, and wanted to have you share with the Parenting Aces community what you've learned.
Sure. It's ever changing. I think that's the first thing and most important thing for everybody to understand. I'm actually supposed to be the referee for a North Carolina Level 3 event at the end of June. And so we had a conference call yesterday. Even the executive director of North Carolina Tennis was on the call and just talking about what we're going to do and how we're going to handle it. We have some thoughts. We want to wait and see what the registrations end up being before we make some final determinations, because this is a tournament that last year had almost 300 people in it, and at 2 sites, actually 3 sites last year. And now 2 of those sites that we were using that were auxiliary sites, one of those is a high school in Charlotte, and they're not, the school system will not let us use high school courts during the summertime. So we've lost 1 site. The other one is a private country club that, they're very busy and they're not sure if they can give us courts because their own members are out and playing. So we're on a scramble right now to try to find some additional courts, or we're going to have to make some modifications as to what we do and draw sizes, things of that nature.
Right.
There's a lot of things we discussed. We have not come up with a final plan, but, just to give you an idea, we discussed, instead of doing a 16 draw for each age division, we would do 2 8-person draws. So that way some of the players are only there for 1 day. And then the next day there's a totally different draw and it's waterfalled. And, then the question becomes, okay, in getting those matches done in 1 day, what format do we use? Do we use the traditional 2 full sets with a match tiebreak? Well, the problem that we run into with junior
Does that become traditional now? 2 full sets with the match tiebreak is now called traditional scoring.
Well, listen, I come from a time period where we played 2 out of 3 full sets in singles and doubles. In
right.
College. A college match would last 8 hours. So it's not traditional to me, but it seems it's the new norm if you're not playing on the national level. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And it is convenient. USTA North Carolina has done a lot of great things through the years, and making it better. We used to do, for example, the Southern Level 3s. We played on a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and now they've got it to where the Southern Level 3s are just on a Saturday, Sunday. But you can only do that with a format change. But the reason it's so much better is you had players who would stay to play on Monday, and then other players that would go home, and now somebody stayed overnight, paid an extra hotel, and they don't get a match on Monday. So I think they've done a lot of good things through the years. I mean, you've been at this a long time like I have. Heck, I remember the old star system for rankings. There was no point, So it's going to be interesting. One of the things we're looking at with the format is, do you go to short sets? Nobody really wants to, but how do you make sure that you can get that done? But even with a short set, you may only be able, that short set match may only take 30 minutes. It may take over 2 hours. I've seen them take 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
And so we're actually looking at possibly doing timed rounds, where we play where it's total number of games won in that time period. You play for an hour and a half. There's a horn that starts the facility, and you serve your first point. There's a horn that stops it. And then that gives us 15 minutes, gets us 5 minutes for the players to leave the court, another 5 minutes to sanitize and do what we can do, and then 5 minutes for the new players to come onto the court from their cars. We're also talking about keeping parents in their cars. They cannot come to the facility because
I would argue that that's a good idea regardless.
There were some that did. They were like, the biggest issue, I've run this tournament for several years. You get to the mid-afternoon, and as matches start to run behind, and all of a sudden you've got a congregation of 200 people in a small area. It's not like a Cary tennis park where everybody can really spread out. I mean, this is a club. So those are the things we're having to look at for this tournament. And the thing is every state, USTA Southern is leaving it to the states in the Southern section to decide how to get back. What are you going to do? What are you not going to do? And they're leaving it to the states to figure that out. And I know with North Carolina, we're actually leaving it to the individual tournaments and having these conversations to try to figure out how do we do it, because what you may have to do at one facility has to be completely different than what you end up doing at a different facility.
Mm-hmm. And let me just point out, if you're not in the Southern section, you're watching this, Southern is made up of 9 states, and the states are then also divided up and have like their local district USTA offices and have local tournaments. So Southern is a different animal than a lot of the other sections around the USTA, and it's complicated because there's so many states and such a wide geographic area is covered by that section.
It is. And for example, one of the things is we cannot use any of the indoor courts. And part of the reason that we're not using indoor courts is because, different states don't allow it. North Carolina, we can't use indoors right now.
Don't allow it because of COVID, you're saying?
Yeah, because of COVID.
Okay.
And so, my comment was, I kind of thought, well, gosh, if you only have, 4 kids on 2 indoor courts, and that's all that's in that building, it doesn't really seem like a huge issue, but they're trying to be consistent as much as they can, because up north, everybody is indoors.
Right.
And so it's going to be interesting. I think that parents and players are going to have to be very patient and understanding. I mean, at least we're getting to play. At least we're able to get back and get going. But I do think every tournament is going to be there's going to be a lot of thought and a lot of discussion going into what do we do and how do we do. And nobody's going to get it right, and no matter what we do, somebody's going to be upset with the way it's handled. But, until I guess our society gets a hold of all this or the world gets a hold of this, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. For example, Cary Tennis Park. I don't know if you're familiar with Cary Tennis Park.
Of course.
Figured, yeah. They're not even open right now, even though we're in phase 2 in North Carolina and there's public parks wide open and playing. The public parks here in Fayetteville, only 40 miles away, have never closed, but Cary Tennis Park is still not open. No play, no instruction, nothing.
Because they're just being ultra conservative and deciding when to reopen.
Yeah, the city government has said no, we're not going to have it.
Oh,
open.
it's the city. Okay, it's not the facility itself.
Yeah, well, yeah, Cary Tennis Park is part of the city, so they fall under the city regulations.
Got it. Okay. I want to just say, for those of you watching, if you have questions about what's happening with junior tournaments, please type them in the comments. We can see your comments live as they come in. So, well, I don't know, Scott, if you're on Facebook, but I can see your comments as they come in, and we'll be happy to ask your questions of Scott. So, Scott, what else are you hearing? I mean, what was the gist of all these conference calls you've been on all week?
Well, a lot of different things. I'm involved in several projects, and some of them had to do with those other projects. I'm helping to write some of the modules for the new USPTA testing for tennis professionals. So I'm doing a little bit of work with that. And then, of course, with the PTM programs, I've had several calls about that. We're trying to make a bunch of changes to that. And
PTM, for those that don't know, professional tennis management, they are college degree programs that are being offered around the country now.
Yeah, there's 11 PTM programs around the country. Ferris State and us, Hope College in Michigan, Manhattanville, Bridgewater State in Connecticut, Central Florida, which is right there at the national campus in Lake Nona. So we've been doing a lot of work to kind of advance the stature of that and working that within this new certification program that the PTR and USPTA are going to be doing.
Great. We just got a question from Hev Galley asking if there are any updates for Southern California and will sectionals be held. Have you heard anything about that?
My understanding, and I'm not educated on every section as to what's going on right now. Sure. I know Southern, we are still planning to have our sectional championships. They've been moved to the end of July, beginning of August. And of course that's a huge event. They're bringing in 200 players and their families into one city to have those events. I believe most of the other sections are still on go at this point. I know that they have canceled the national clay courts. They have canceled the junior team tennis sectional championships, state championships, and national championships. I believe the hard court championships in August right now are still on go for the nationals. They haven't come out with a final decision on that, but I believe most of the sections at this point are still planning to have their championships, just moving them later.
Right. And that's what I would say, go to your section's website. Absolutely. And most of the sections have a junior competition section on their sectional website. And we have links to all that. If you go to parentingaces.com, there is a link to navigating the USTA website with direct links to each section's junior comp page. So we've made it simple for you if you don't want to have to dig around. But I would say check with your section. And if you don't see anything on the website, reach out to your sectional junior competition director. That person should be able to give you the information you need. Definitely.
And I think it's going to be fluid. I mean, even the ones in Southern, yes, we have them planned. I think everybody wants to have them. So I would be surprised if it doesn't happen. But at the same time, nothing surprises me anymore. I put a meme on Facebook back in April and for April Fool's Day, and I was like, "There's no April Fool's Day this year because nobody can make up what's actually really happening." Right?
Seriously. Well, one of the things that I've seen, and I know you have seen as well, because I've seen you comment on it, is people being concerned that these events are taking place and that certain families may not feel comfortable traveling to these big sectional or national events. So, I think let's talk about that, because from my perspective, first of all, health comes first, right? And you have to do what you feel comfortable doing for you and your family's health and safety. First and foremost, tennis is tennis. It's an activity. It's a privilege. It is not a necessity. If your child misses a big sectional event, their ranking is not going to plummet. They're not going to backtrack in their development. And in fact, they may even improve their development by skipping an event and skipping the stress and tension and physical demands of playing these big sectional events. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to skip a tournament, even if it's being held.
Absolutely. We've had this mentality in tennis, I think, for the last 15 years in junior tennis of keeping up with the Joneses. And, I liken that to, I feel like we need to do a better job of parent education in tennis. And, you've done a fantastic job of that over the last few years. Exactly. And I've said that for 25 years that we don't do a very good job of that. And so parents learn from other parents. And so we've kind of created that atmosphere of keeping up with the Joneses. And I think that people are going to have to make decisions that are good for them. There's risk getting out of bed every morning. And, if you ask Life Alert, there's still a risk staying in your home. So, to the commercial. But so I think the thing is that people are going to have to decide what they really want to do and don't want to do. We're so fortunate, I think, in this day and age with the internet and with our society that there's so many ways to play college tennis, or there's so many ways to, play tennis and enjoy the game. So many parents are so caught up on their UTR or their USTA ranking. And, a lot of college coaches right now, with the dead period being extended, Division I is going to the end of July now. Division II, I believe, is going to the end of June.
Let's be clear what that means. Dead period. Sure. Dead period means that coaches cannot contact the players, cannot actively recruit them, right?
Correct. And I think Division II may actually be in a quiet period, as they call it, as opposed to dead, where they can still contact them, but they can't, see them in person.
No visits.
Right. Yeah. And, in some college campuses like Methodist here, we're shut down. So we couldn't have a campus visit if we wanted to right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the showcases, a lot of the coaches have been talking about that the showcases are going to be probably bigger and more important this coming year than they probably have been, because the coaches haven't been able to see these players play. And let's face it, unless you are top 50, top 100 maybe in the country, you're recruiting the college. It's not necessarily the coach that's recruiting you.
I would say top 50. I would say if you're outside the top 50, you are doing the work yourself as the player.
Absolutely. And it's going to be interesting because, with the immigration offices being shut down, it's going to be very interesting to see how many international players are able to get back into the country to go back to school. I know that we had a player here at Methodist who's from Venezuela, and we advised her, we said, you really need to stay in the U.S. this summer, because if you leave, you may not be able to get back in.
And we've seen that with a lot of players. A lot of players have stayed and not gone back to their home country because of exactly that reason.
Exactly. And it's going to be interesting too. You figure there's so many dynamics in play. You have, I think it's 20 collegiate programs that have cut their programs. College tennis programs have been cut in the last 3 months. From East Carolina to App State to Division II schools, even junior colleges. Broward County down in Florida, which has been a developing junior college for, particularly basketball and other sports, they're cutting out all athletics and trying to save money. So you put that, plus the fact that they've given an extra year of eligibility to the seniors from this last spring to the international component. Everybody's just still trying to get their hands, their heads on wrapped around this and their hands on it, to really kind of understand what's going to happen, not just going into this year, but I really think fall of 2021.
Sure. I mean, my take on it is we're going to see ramifications for the next 3 to 4 years, right? Because even the kids that were freshmen last year are impacted by this, right? If the seniors are allowed to come back, maybe somebody, decided to go to a certain school because they understood that they might not play their freshman year, but once the seniors left, they would have a spot in the lineup. And now that the seniors are returning, that's delayed, so maybe they're transferring. I mean, I saw the question yesterday and somebody asked how many kids are in the transfer portal. I haven't seen the number for men, but there are over 400 women college players in the transfer portal right now. That's a really high number, right?
It is. Well, if you think about it, there's been, I think it's 11 women's programs have been canceled so far in the last 3 months. So if you have 10 players on each team, you're looking at almost 100 players right there,
right?
Just from that, much less than those players that maybe are impacted by other players having an extra year of eligibility, or those seniors who have that extra year of eligibility but are graduated from their institution wanting to transfer and go to graduate school. So
exactly,
there's going to be a lot of that. And honestly, I really think, if you look at Division I think we're in this on many different levels. If you look at Division I, we're in this because the athletic directors have found different conference alignments for football. It was all about football. It was all about the revenue from football. What they really didn't plan on is the additional cost for travel for all the other sports. And now we're in a situation where I read an article a couple of weeks ago where they said that we will have college football sometime this next academic year. They can't even imagine what it will be like if we don't. They're like, just financially, there's no way. It cannot happen. It'll be an absolute catastrophe to college athletics.
Yeah.
So I was going to say,
go ahead.
I really think what you're going to start to see athletic directors do is to find different conference alignments for the non-revenue sports. I think it was Dan Beebe, who used to be the commissioner of the Pac-12, brought this idea up. And
we're seeing it, right? We're already seeing some moves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what you're going to see is they'll have a certain alignment for football, and then in basketball, and then you'll start to see these other sports where they'll go back to being more local. So I think it's going to impact is going to last a long time.
Right. And Diane Terry had emailed me. She's a parent. Her son is a college player. She had emailed me asking what the minimum number of teams in a conference had to be in order for the conference to get a berth in the NCAA championships for tennis. And the answer to that is 6, right? So if there are fewer than 6 tennis teams in a conference, there's no automatic berth into the year-end NCAA championships. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And so that maybe NCAA is going to offer waivers for that for this next year, just because the circumstances are so incredibly unusual. But as it stands now, that's the rule. So all of this conference moving around, these schools are going to have to be careful to make sure they align with a conference that has enough teams to give them a chance to compete in the championships.
I agree with that. I don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. I think it's just going to be interesting to see how the funding goes. There was a article, I think you read it. It was on Athletic Director U. A guy was analyzing the Olympic sports and the relationship with NCAA, and he point blank said in that article, there was a sentence that said college tennis programs need to go away. And, he was talking about the spending, that South Carolina, which is a Power 5 school in the SEC, was spending more per player on their women's tennis team than they were for their national champion or ranked number 1 in the country women's basketball team. And, and then when you put into the fact that I think he said in the SEC, over 50% of every roster had international players, then he was using it as justification. And I do think it makes it easier for an athletic director that if you have a roster of 8 internationals out of 10, well, if we cut this program, we're not going to really get the earful unless we cut something that has all Americans on it. So I think a lot of that goes into all this.
Sure.
And I don't think it's over.
Well, Tim Russell, the CEO of the Intercollegiate Tennis Association, the ITA, did write a rebuttal to that piece on, which I also shared. But we're getting a couple questions come in, so I want to just give some space for those. Jeff Bearup, hey Jeff. Jeff says, my understanding is each section is only allowed one L3 this year because not all sections met the date block for hosting their first event. New England hosted our first L3 in January, so our sectional championship or second L3 will now be converted to an L4 later this summer. So that's interesting that I didn't know that. I'm sure you're aware of that stuff, Scott, because your fingers on the pulse of all that, but an interesting statement.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, there's many modifications that are happening. I think as the tournaments get up and get going again, you're going to see even more changes as we go. Just to try, because everybody's planning on having it, but I think you're going to find that as they start to do it, gosh, we don't have enough courts. We can't have as big of a draw. I think you're just going to see a lot of it, a lot of adapting for the next 3 to 4 months.
Sure.
And people, I hope people will be patient with it.
Amy Anzelotti asked too, she says, isn't it likely that only the players on full or part scholarship will stay for an extra year? I think that's speculation. Of course, we don't know what everybody's going to do.
No, and honestly, from what I've heard, it's kind of a program by program decision. Some programs are honoring that scholarship for that senior for that 5th year. Some of them are telling them you're welcome to stay, but we've already made other offers and your money is gone. So I really think it's a program by program basis as to whether that's going to happen or not.
Right. And we're also seeing for the programs that have been canceled, some of them are continuing to honor the scholarships, even though the tennis program is gone. But others are saying the tennis program's gone and your scholarship's gone. Yeah. So that's contributing to the increase in the transfer portal too.
It is. And, and you have schools, I think it was St. Edward's, it's a nationally ranked Division II school in Texas. They had to raise, I think it was $2 million in 30 days.
It was something insane. It was ridiculous. It was way above the budget.
It is, but they were trying to get them to raise an amount to endow the budget. That was the point. And then you have
when you talk to a program like Stanford and hear how many years it took them to endow their program.
Absolutely. And then you had, I guess it was Alabama Huntsville. They were in the middle of that. I think this weekend is kind of their deadline. They had to raise, I think it was $150,000 maybe, and they're pretty close. They've raised over $100,000 already so far.
But then there are other schools where the players have gone to the athletic director and said, if we raise the money, will you preserve our program? Tell us what to do. And the athletic directors have said, there's nothing you can do.
No, and there was actually, I can't remember the article and I can't remember who said it, but it was actually an athletic director who did the actual break-even analysis of getting rid of a program and originally said, we're going to get rid of a program. This was several years ago. And after doing the break-even analysis, he came back and said, no, we're not going to get rid of it. We actually end up netting more money when you look at the tuition, room, and board. And so I think a lot of ADs are, I don't want to say that they're making that decision unjustly, but maybe they're not necessarily looking at it or they're not being allowed to look at it and really figure out what's the break even. I mean, I know that small schools all the time, you have a roster of 15 players. Well, why do you have a roster of 15 players with 3 scholarships? Well, because we're not costing the school any money. We're trying to actually net more. And I think that if that kind of thinking went into the D1 schools, you'd see more of them not get rid of a tennis program. And my concern with it, I actually reached out to Newland with USTA this last week, which she runs the tennis on campus program. And I said, have we contacted these schools across the country getting rid of tennis programs to make sure that we get at least a tennis on campus going? Because my concern is, if you don't have a college tennis program going on and now nobody's using those courts, the courts are going to get, run down, and all of a sudden you're going to either get rid of more courts or USTA is going to have to put more money back into fixing them up again. So, we really, as an industry, we've got to find a way to change the narrative. The narrative right now is, we don't need college tennis programs in some schools. They're looking at that. If you look at the programs cut so far this year, tennis is like by far the number one program that they've cut, and we've got to find a way to change that. And I think community engagement's part of it. You've got to find a way to get the local tennis players involved with these schools, whether it's a small school, whether it's a top D1 school. Get the community involved. And I hate to say it, but we've got to find a way to get American players back on college tennis teams. I know there's a lot of thoughts on that, and people talking about there should be quotas, or they shouldn't even be coming. I don't know. I think the rest of us, we just need to raise our game, and we need to figure out how to get more American kids on the college program.
Well, that's part of it, raising the game for sure. But the other part of it is families need to broaden their perspective on college tennis and what is a quality program for their child from an academic and a tennis standpoint. And to me, that's a big piece of this issue is parents have been kind of groomed by a lot of forces, but one force for sure is the junior coaches who like to promote themselves by how many kids they've placed at top D1 programs around the country. And so those are the programs that the parents look at as the gold standard. Those are the programs that the junior players look at as the gold standard. And neither the parent nor the player is willing to look outside that small group of gold standard programs. And, the reality is that every tennis team in college is limited in the number of new kids it's going to bring in each year, and even more limited in the number of scholarships it's going to have to give out. So to limit yourself and say, I'm only looking at, this handful of top D1 programs, I'm not willing to consider anything else, is narrow-minded and feeding directly into the issue of why there are so many international kids on some of these teams. The coaches want to recruit American. I've heard that over and over and over again from college coaches, whether the coach themselves is American or an international coach. They all say the same thing. They want local kids. They want to engage their community by having the local kids there that the community is familiar with from, seeing the kid's name in the paper for their junior tennis accomplishments or their high school tennis accomplishments. But if the player and the player's family isn't willing to consider that smaller, local, non-nationally known or non-nationally ranked program, then what's the coach supposed to do? They've got to field a team.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Let me ask you a question. What if college tennis had no scholarships? What would change?
I think we'd have fewer kids of a certain economic level getting involved in our sport. I think that would be part of it. I also think we'd see fewer international kids wanting to be on the teams because I think for a lot of them, it's a way to fund their college education. So if they're not able to fund it through tennis, hopefully they'd be able to fund it through academic scholarship money or grants. But I certainly think that would have an impact. But, part of the problem is, Scott, junior tennis development comes with a really high price tag. And, it's difficult to justify that price tag and I know, and I say this all the time, we can't think of putting our kids in tennis because we want a return on our investment in terms of college scholarship money, but we want a return on our investment in terms of college scholarship money. We want at least a little help.
No, you're right. If we were to get rid of college scholarships for tennis tomorrow, you would see the recruiting companies go away for tennis. There would be a lot less of that. There would be a lot less with the junior development programs, exactly what you were saying. I wrote a letter a few years ago. I used to run some more of the national tournaments. And I wrote a letter to USTA Southern saying, I'm done. And just listed all these different issues that I'm seeing running these tournaments with the parents, with the players. And a lot of the reason for that is the professionalization of junior tennis. You know, I mean,
I think that was the first recent conversation you and I had was after you shared that letter on Facebook, and it caught my attention for sure.
And, you know, it was one of these things where, you know, 20 years ago, parents were spending a couple of $100s a month on their kids' tennis, maybe 300. You know, now it's 3,000. And, you know, if that's the case, then, you know, no wonder the expectations are higher. No wonder the expectations for a 12 and under are higher. And, you know, and we've got to get away from that. And you know what? There's a lot of blame to go around. The system creates it. You know, a lot of people want to put that on the point system. I don't necessarily think it's the point system. But at the same time, you know, entry fees for tournaments are higher. I mean, you know, there's a lot more money being put into junior tennis now. It's an economic engine at this point.
Sure.
Same with the recruiting services. And I think that's all of that goes into creating what you're talking about of wanting a return. And yeah, there's a lot of players who, you're right, they could go play Division III, they could go play at Division II, and you know, it's all about D1, even if they don't even get to play. So
that's right. That's right. And I just want to say, Markus Dayton just commented. All right, I'm gonna rile you up a little, Scott. The number one part of the blame belongs to the USTA. It all began 20 years ago when they made a fortune off of junior tennis and junior competition. Then it climbed even further as we had less and less actual former college players as tennis pros, and got worse and worse as all the lies went around in parent circles about what is available to junior players. Every junior player needs to play at a Power 5. And it's just what we're saying. But, you know, I think people ask me all the time, like, why are you still doing Parenting Aces? Your kid's not playing anymore. You've got no skin in the game anymore. Honestly, it's to bring some truth to our sport and to hold people accountable for what's happening and to help parents understand what this is all about. And I will say, I don't regret for 1 second teaching my kids how to play tennis. I don't regret for 1 second supporting my son, who was the only one of my 3 kids who chose to pursue tennis at the highest level during his junior years and went on to play D1. But those of you who listen to my podcast with him, you know, he was very honest about his feelings toward the sport and hasn't picked up a racket in 3 years. And I suspect it's going to be a lot longer when he ever does pick up another racket. But we all need to come into this with our eyes open. And all that said, I still love the game of tennis. I think it is a phenomenal way to offer our children an opportunity to learn some incredible lessons, to make friends that they will have throughout their lives, to learn a skill that will last them throughout their lives, and to be fit and healthy and outdoors and, you know, doing something positive. So regardless of what happens with college tennis and college tennis scholarships, and regardless of what happens with junior competition, I still believe in tennis and I still want to see it survive and thrive.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And, you know, it's the reason I still do it. You know, I'm in a classroom now. I'm trying to actually hopefully educate the next generation of tennis coaches out there, and hopefully make them better and understand better. And you're right. It's there's so many different influencing factors. You know, I had a girl that I used to coach, and her dad called me complaining. She played a UTR event last weekend, and you know, she had a real long first round match for 2 hours, went right back on the court 15 minutes later, and had to play a girl that was actually a player for the guy who was actually running the tournament. And he's just, and, you know, and I'm like, you know, I'm not going to say his name. I'm like, shut up. Just shut up. Like, but I was like, no. I was like, look,
I love you. You are awesome.
I was like, I grew up playing. We played 5-6 matches a day in 90-degree heat. It didn't matter.
Yeah,
you know, you just play.
You just wanted to play too.
Yeah, and I was like,
right.
You know what? Sometimes you're gonna get a raw deal. I was like, sure. So she only got a 15-minute break, and she played a girl who didn't have to play her first match the next. Great. So what? Life is not fair. And, and I run into that. I mean, I had to deal with that sometimes with my freshman students. I have to kind of straighten them out because they come in and they're like, well, what do you mean I only got a C on this? They were talking about their participation grade in a class. And I'm like, but I took notes every day. I was like, well, great. That's for you. That didn't help the class at all. Well, I asked a couple of questions. I was like, okay, that's what you should do. And I emphasized to them as they were going into their internships this summer, a lot of times the younger kids, when they're trying to figure it out, they think that, well, I did what I was asked and I showed up each day. Well, why am I not getting a promotion or raise? I was like, because you did what you should do and you're already getting compensated for that. If you want something more, you have to do more. It's not that you get it and then decide to do it. Life will never work that way. And so
it works that way for some people, but not for the vast majority of us.
Yeah. And not often. So, I really think that, when you look at these junior tournaments I've been at and run, I get parents say all the time, well, I'm fighting for my kid. I'm fighting for my kid. And I'm like, great. Let them fight that. Yes. They need to learn to fight that. Tennis is about life lessons, and playing tournaments is about life lessons. But I will say, I do like where USTA is going, having the net generation level that's not competitive. It's about play. It's about recreational opportunities.
Yeah.
And then you have this whole other competitive play up top where, okay, yeah, it does get serious.
Right.
I've said for years that if you liken tennis to soccer, when you look at junior soccer, they have the local YMCA or rec league, then you have a travel league, and then you have ODP. Well, in tennis, we start
ODP being Olympic development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, with tennis, we started to travel. We don't have that local little league anymore where people just play the game experience. And so, we need that. And a lot of people they jump too high too quick, or they're trying to do too much too quick. And, there was an article written last week, I can't remember who wrote it, that I read talking about, if your kid doesn't have the talent, why are you putting 30 hours a week of tennis on them at 12 years old or 10 years old? I really think keeping it real and keeping it honest is very important for the coaches. It's important for the parents. Just like what you were saying, it's keeping it in
truth in tennis.
Yeah.
Hashtag truth in tennis.
There we go.
But, let's be honest about the economic model of junior development. And that is, the more players a coach has on court, the more money that coach is generating for him or herself. And if the players are off playing on their own, not in a lesson or in a group, the coach isn't making money from that. And so, it's a conundrum, right? I mean, obviously, a coach has a right to make a living in the profession he or she is pursuing and should be paid and paid fairly for that time. But we also need to be really careful not to perpetuate a system that's driving more people out of the sport than bringing new people into the sport. And I fear that's where we are right now. I hope that we see a resurgence of, people with this new USTA structure. And I had Lou Brewer do a podcast with me when the new structure was announced. It's supposed to go into effect in January 2021, where the tournament structure is going to be consistent across all sections of USTA. And as Scott was just saying, there are going to be those entry-level tournaments that are really just about fun, just playing. I don't even know if there are ranking points affiliated with them, or if there are, they're like minuscule. But then those players who want more and who want to advance to the next level can, but there will still be plenty of opportunities for those kids that just want to play for fun and just want to get better at the game so that they can, call up a buddy and go play tennis and not make a fool of themselves on a tennis court. So I think it's a good move too. I hope they stick with that, even in light of everything going on right now.
They are.
Good.
Part of the training that I was on this last week was for tournament directors. going through the TMT, the tournament they're replacing
software.
Yeah, and going through that, and then how that will work in running tournaments starting next year. And it's a good system. It's
Good.
definitely a good system. They will, the whole system will allow non-sanctioned events. So if you're not doing a competitive tournament, everything will still run there. It'll be a one-stop of all different events that could be on there. So I think that's really good. You made a comment a minute ago about the coaches earning a living on the court, and I think it's interesting. When I was, back, if you look back in the 80s and the early 90s, and you look at the salaries that tennis directors were making then, I think the average salary has not really changed in those 30 years. The last research I looked at.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, some of them have actually gone down, and depending on certain types of facilities. And so, the golf pro will get a $70,000 salary. The tennis pro, here's your 20. Yeah, go make the rest of it on the court. The club industry has been part to blame for some of that as well, in creating that stigma. Tennis coaches are given a little bit, and they have to go make it on the court. They're put in that position.
Right.
And it's funny, everybody wants to be a high performance coach. I mean, the students that are in our PTM program here, the 50 of them, when we had conversations one-on-ones this last year about what part of the industry do they want to go into, 80% of them go, I want to work with high performance players. And I'm like, why?
That's what I was getting ready to say. Then you have to deal with the parents. Why would you want to do that?
And, and they're like, well, I want to work with the really good players. And I was like, okay, I said, I'm a nationally ranked player. Why should I work with you? Well, I can make you better. Okay, who have you developed? I was like, that's not where you want to go in and make an impact. That's like, get into the industry, get people to have fun doing it. And, there's some coaches out there I know that's what they focus on. They focus on entry level. They focus on having fun, getting the kids to learn the game and get going. And I guarantee you at night, they're a whole lot happier than a lot of these junior development coaches dealing with the parent and dealing with the kids. And then, your livelihood is dependent upon the success of a 12-year-old.
Right.
And the perceived success from the parents. The kid could be making all the progress he wants, but if he's not winning, the parents get upset and get rid of him. So
interesting. Okay, Marcus is typing a comment here. Remember, the college coaches are only making about 2% more than they were 30 years ago on average. ITA was supposed to originally be a college coaches union association to help raise that amount. As it changed with the time, somehow adding on to coaches' salaries got forgotten.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I've had a lot of conversations with Tim Russell over these past several weeks too, because every time I hear of a college program getting cut, he's my go-to, like what's going on? Why did they get cut? What's ITA doing? Why isn't USTA sending money to stop this? Like, what is happening? And
it's like App State is a bewilderment to me as to why they
really weird, right?
Yeah, I mean, they kept the women's program. I think somebody told me that it will really only save them $240,000 to get rid of the men's tennis program. I don't know. Maybe there's something there that I didn't see, but that one kind of bewildered me a little bit. I understand Wisconsin, Green Bay. They didn't have a tennis facility on campus. They're traveling 20 minutes one way just to get to a facility. I think they were struggling with roster sizes a little bit too. I think they were right at having 6 players. And I think that's the other thing the bigger D1 schools are going to have to look at is, one, they're going to have to grow their program. They're going to have 12 to 15 players on the roster. It makes it a whole lot harder to get rid of it. I know here at Methodist, we've got, 19 on our women's team and 28 on our men's team.
Really?
I guarantee you tennis is not going anywhere here at Methodist because of that.
And just for those that don't understand the economics of that, that means because of the way scholarships are handed out, that the vast majority of those players are paying their way to be at that school. So the school is deriving direct tuition, room and board, lab fees, books, etc., revenue from all those kids who are outside the scholarship recipients. And so how do you cut a program when that's going to cut revenue to the university as a whole?
Correct. Net revenue. And that's the
Right.
thing that there's a lot of confluence of factors coming in. I think it was starting 2 years ago and going through at least 2025, the number of high school seniors available to go to college is going down. So there's fewer of those students available for all of these colleges. Plus, you add into the fact that a lot of people are second guessing because of the price tag of college education nowadays. That, you know what, maybe we don't want to go to college. Maybe we go to a community college for 2 years and then finish our degree. So a lot of colleges are dealing with declining enrollment right now in general.
Right.
Much less dealing with college athletics on top of that. So I really, in a lot of small schools, if you notice, a lot of the program cuts that have happened so far are D1 schools. I know a lot of small schools here in the South, they don't know what their enrollment is till the first day of classes. I mean, they're still trying to fight to fill that last 5%, the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the first day of classes. So, we could really be in come September 1st for a surprise where, 20 or 30 schools that are small schools come up 5 or 10% short on their enrollment. And now they got to cut $500,000 somewhere this year. We could see that. That's what scares me about the small schools. Plus, you're talking about the online programs that are out there, and now if you think about it, everybody just switched to online for the most part for the spring. So we have now acclimated everybody to being used to an online program. How many are now going to say, you know what, that's all I want to do.
Right.
I don't really want to go back. So I think there's still a lot more fallout to come over the next 6 months with all this. And there's a lot of things I think we can do now, whether it's college coaches, whether it's parents, whether it's players, junior tennis, there's a lot of things that we need to try to adapt to be ready for that.
Well, and let me just say, in terms of the online stuff, and my son works for a company that is an online platform, so they just understand where I'm coming from. But going to college is about a lot of things. It's not only about getting to play your sport and on a college team. It's not only about the classroom academic experience. It's also about learning to live independently, about forging ahead in terms of maturity and personality development, and being uncomfortable and having to work through that discomfort. There are a lot of factors that are part of the college experience beyond the classroom learning and the on-court learning. And so that scares me a little bit, to see so many of these smaller schools at risk of closing or making these cuts, because for many students coming out of high school, they're not ready for that big state school college experience. They don't have the maturity yet to handle the challenges that come with that. And they need these smaller schools where they're going to, it's kind of a transition for them, an easier transition between being home and with their parents watching over their shoulder versus, being completely on their own. So, I mean, I think
the social skills,
Say again?
It's developing social skills.
Sure.
That, you've grown up in one atmosphere for 18 years, and then you go to college and you're in this other somewhat controlled atmosphere to help broaden your horizon some.
Yeah, exactly. So I worry about that, and I worry about the impact that's going to have on this generation of students that may not have as many opportunities available to them as even last year's graduates. So we're in for a lot of changes. Is there anything else, Scott? Because my gosh, we've been doing this for 53 minutes now. That went fast.
Nobody ever accused us of not being able to talk. So
I mean, seriously. Is there anything else in terms of junior tournaments, junior competition that we haven't touched on yet today that we need to know?
If I, whether it's you want to take it as advice or whatever, I just think that everybody needs to be flexible. They need to be patient. It's not like we were dealing with a completely perfect system before this happened. Everybody has their opinion. Everybody thinks that UTR is the greatest, that USTA is the the great evil. Other people think USTA is great and UTR is a developing evil. Whatever it is, it's going to be very interesting the next 2 to 3 months. It's going to be interesting to see if our society goes from, whether you call it level 2 or whatever it is, to becoming level 3 or more open. Every state is different right now. And then you throw in the fact that every local community is different. I look just here in North Carolina, and the fact that Cary Tennis Park isn't even open. Their city is not even open. There is no tennis at all. You go to, Charlotte, and they're open, but they have certain regulations they have to do. So you go to Gardner-Webb University, their tennis facility has been open the entire time. The public parks here in Fayetteville, whole time. So just within one, state, there's that many different changes or ways it's being handled. You put out there that every state's going to be different. Every tournament's going to be different. You may see some format changes at one tournament that they just had to do, where it's not at another. So I think, if everybody will just be patient, I think the trick is be patient, and we're actually out playing. I think that's better than everybody being holed up in a cave somewhere. So, I know that we have the guidelines that USTA has put out, CDC's put stuff out, those guidelines are great, but they're going to be implemented differently at every tournament, because of the details of that facility. As I said at the beginning of the show, if you're at Cary Tennis Park with 30-something courts and it's very spread out, it's a lot easier to social distance than you are at Blakeney Racket Club in Charlotte, where there's not a lot of ingress and egress, and everybody's going to be on top of each other. And there's been times at that tournament we've had 200 people in 800 square foot area. And so we're going to have to do things differently to be able to manage that. So,
and I let me just also reiterate 2 things. One is, you don't have to go to the tournaments. It's okay. It's okay to skip a tournament. It's not going to be the ruin of your child's junior tennis career to miss a tournament or 5 tournaments or not play another tournament in 2020. They're not going to, lose everything that they've been working toward to this point. The purpose of tournaments, as we've heard coaches say over and over again, is to test what's happening on the practice court each day. And if you don't get to have the test, it's okay. Still get out there and play if there are courts available and you feel safe doing that. And if you don't feel safe doing that, that's okay too. Those who know my son's story know that he took 3 months off his freshman year of college, did not touch a racket, did not do 1 iota of training, and came back stronger than ever for his sophomore year. So it's not the end of the world. The other thing is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to add on to that. One of the girls I coached, Kirsten Ward, ended up with a full ride to Elon. Well, at 15 and a half years old, she ends up tearing a labrum, freak injury, and had to have surgery. She was out of tennis for, I think it was almost 2 years. And she was, top 12, top 15 in the South in the 18s. Took that time off, came back, got back up to there, and, still got a full ride at a D1 school. So there's so many different ways. I've had players who have ended up playing college tennis, and they didn't have the rankings. But you know what? The coaches got to see them. They did a great job of pursuing the coach, getting to know the coach. Coach got to know her, and all of a sudden she gets to play. I mean, there's so many different ways. It's not just one way.
Right. And I think that's important. And I think it kind of ties right into what we were saying about looking beyond the top D1 schools and understanding that there are lots of programs out there. Now, if you're not out playing tournaments because of whatever reason you're not out playing tournaments, whether it's financial or health reasons or anything else, that means the onus is going to be on the player that much more to be assertive, if not aggressive, in their recruiting efforts. If they do want to play in college, they are going to have to take the initiative and reach out to coaches and make sure that they have video that they can send the coaches of their playing style, and, you know, play practice matches and videotape those and get those to the coaches. So there is going to be more of an onus on the player to take the reins and drive the process if they're not out at the tournaments. But the tournaments, that doesn't make you a better player. It makes you, you know, spend a lot of money. It makes you miss a lot of other things in your life that you might rather be at, I will say. But, you know, the tournaments don't make you a better player. It's the work you put in day by day. And the goal, as always, should be every time you step on the tennis court, are you improving 1% that day? If you're improving 1% that day, you're doing the work, you're getting the job done, and that's what's important.
Or even if you're failing that day, you know, if you look at where most, I think it was when I was doing my master's of education, there was a research project I read that found that most of the, you know, light bulb comes on type of moments happen when you're actually struggling the most. And so, you know, that's how we learn. When we go through that struggle, you live through that struggle, you deal with that struggle. Usually at the end of that is where you actually make the improvement. And so you don't even have to improve 1% every day. Go fail. That's how you get better.
Well, but if you fail, you use that as the opportunity to get the 1% gain, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
And the thing you mentioned about that the onus is on the players and the parents to recruit the college. Just as you said earlier, if you're not in the top 50 in your age division, that's what
in
you're
the country. In the country.
In the country. Yeah. That's what you should be doing anyway. You know, and you know, and it's interesting, from all these years of working with players and getting them to go play college tennis, the first thing I always ask them to do is make a list of 30 schools. And you'd be amazed how hard that is for them. They come back with 5 schools, and I'm like, okay, great. Where there's 2,000 institutions offering tennis in this country, where are they? And I tell them, okay, we'll go look at their conference. You know, take this school that you put down. Now go back and look at the entire conference and add those to your list. And then add, you know, this one and add the schools in their conference. And amazingly, all of a sudden they come back with 30, and they're like, I didn't even know that this school had it. I was like, exactly. Right. And that's part of, I think, important for the kids too, is to the junior players, is to go through that process, because they start to learn about things they never would have thought about before. And they learn about schools they never would have thought about before.
And let me just say, the UTR website is a great resource for doing that exact exercise, because you can search schools that are in line with your current UTR, and you can see where would I fit into that, to a lineup. You know, what is the list of schools, and it will spit out a list of schools for you, and then you can mark them. I forget how it works because I haven't looked in a while, but to where you keep track of those schools, and you can get the coaching contact and all of that. So they've made it really easy on their website.
They have, but you also have to take that with a grain of salt too, because if a player looks at these teams with a UTR and they have their UTR, they're always judging themselves by the highest UTR they've ever had. And you can't do that. You know, your UTR is going to change as you go. And I see Facebook posts all the time. Oh, well, I had this player, and, you know, they were 10.2, but they've beaten players that are 11, and, you know, or they used to be a 10.9. You can't do that. And the second thing to understand is a lot of the UTRs of the players playing college tennis actually tend to go down a little bit.
I was just getting ready to say that. Yeah.
And so it's kind of created, that's part of what propagated, as you said earlier, this false mentality with some of these players and parents about where they really think they should believe or be. And that's why some of the parents get so frustrated with college coaches when the college coach is not interested in their son or daughter. And they're like, well, but, well, the college coach knows that he really needs a UTR that's higher than that, no matter what the roster might say.
Right. Right. And to be clear, college coaches will tell you point blank, UTR is not the end all be all for them when they're recruiting. That is one factor among many that they're looking at when they're looking to fill their rosters. So it's a jumping off point. And I want to just state that again, it is a jumping off point, but the UTR website does have that tool available. And I do think it's a great way to to form that initial list of schools that you might want to look at. And then there are a million other factors that need to come into play. And we've talked about that ad nauseum on parentingaces.com. So we don't need to talk about that again. But if people have specific questions about it, reach out to me, reach out to Scott. We will be happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the junior tournaments, all we know right now is sections have been directed by USTA National to make their own decisions about what tournaments they're going to hold, what formats they're going to use, and then within the sections, there may be a variety of formats and decisions made about which tournaments are held based on local regulations and what's happening in terms of opening tennis back up in a community. So there's unfortunately no blanket statement that we can say these tournaments are happening, these tournaments aren't happening. You need to check with your section. If it's not on the website where you're seeing it clearly, reach out to your section's junior development chair, junior competition chair, to find out how your particular section is handling things. And then for the national events, look on USTA's national junior competition page. All of those links are on parentingaces.com. If you click on the USTA website link, all that's there for you. So take a look, figure out what's happening where you live, and then make a decision based on what's best for you and your family, knowing that if your child doesn't get to play tournaments this summer or even into the fall, it's not the end of the world.
Absolutely. And just to add on to that, there's going to be different experiences of tournaments going back. You may go to one tournament and they did a great job with social distancing, controlling the flow, and wow, I really felt safe at this tournament. This was great. You may end up at another tournament where it's a mob and, there's a ton of people all in the same area. And, and it's just because everybody's really trying to get a handle on this. It's so early. I know here in North Carolina, they're still just trying to figure out what tournaments are we going to have, which ones are we not going to, because a lot of that goes back to what facilities are able to have tournaments, which ones are not, what kind of plan do they have? And, North Carolina is doing a great job. I think they're making us submit a plan. This is my plan of, here's our ingress, our egress, where our sanitation stations are, how we're going to control the flow. They're doing a great job with that. I can't speak for everywhere around the country, but I think that there's going to be good experiences. There's going to be bad ones. And I just hope that everybody will be patient. And, if you run into a bad experience and you don't feel like, it's not real good, think we're going to go on, make that decision. As you said at the beginning, safety's first. This is just tennis. It is a game. And, but I hope everybody will be patient and not get overly frustrated or upset, and just enjoy that you're actually outside.
Let me ask you one last question, something we didn't touch on. What are you hearing in terms of USTA rankings and how players are going to be selected for events, and what happens if, let's say, a family decides, it's not worth it to us. We're not going to travel to tournaments right now, so my kid's going to miss out on some ranking points. How is that going to impact them once tennis is back in full swing, getting into events?
Sure. They froze them beginning, I think it was in March. I would be very surprised if they unfreeze the rankings for a few more months. I would not think it would be till after the national hard courts, if they have that in August, or after the sectional events happen in late July, beginning of August. I would think maybe starting around September 1st, you might see them unfreeze it. It could be later.
And when you say that, that means that if kids are playing tournaments between now and the time the rankings are unfrozen, those points won't feed into the rankings anyway.
Correct.
Okay, wait a minute. That's really important. That's really important, because there are families who are really concerned about that if I choose not to go play, then I am at risk of my kid's ranking dropping and my kid falling behind his or her peers. And what Scott is saying is USTA has said that even if a child plays tournaments between now and the time the rankings are unfrozen, those ranking points will not feed in to the rankings, so they won't count. So your child, by not playing tournaments, isn't going to fall behind.
Yeah, I would be, again, a lot of it is still to be determined. For example,
Okay.
right now, we're still planning to play the Southern Closed before the National Hard Courts. That's the reason why they've scheduled it when they have at the end of July. What if we have a rise in COVID and all of a sudden they decide to close down the community where it was supposed to be? Now what starts to happen? Or what if it's not us? What if it's New England that does that? So I still think section by section is going to make the determination of what they use to, what am I trying to say? Not sponsor players, but endorse players to go to the national championships. I think they're still working through the details of that. I think every section is going to be a little bit different, depending upon if they can have their sectional championships before the hard courts. I think that the best case, or the most likely scenario, is they're going to use the rankings back as of March when they froze them to make any of those decisions, because of the unsure nature of selecting. I know that, for example, national hard courts are going to be April 5th, 6th. They're usually somewhere in that time frame.
August, you mean?
I'm sorry, I said April. You're right.
You
August.
did. Yeah.
I've been cooped up too long.
I know.
But there's no way they can use those sectional results to make the determinations, because they'll have to do the endorsements well in advance of that.
Right.
So I really do think it's going to be the March rankings where they froze them is what's going to make those decisions through September. And then I would think after that, you'll start to see them open it back up. It also would not surprise me. We start the new junior program on January 1st with
the 7 levels.
7 levels.
Yep.
It would not surprise me if they come back and say, we're going to freeze them all the way till we start that.
Yeah.
Would not surprise me.
Okay, so we just got a question, and I feel very strongly that we need to address this question. Why would the Southern Close happen if the points won't count? Okay, here's where the mentality needs to change. Right. Playing tournaments isn't just about earning ranking points. It is about the experience of competition, being with your peers, being out on the court. It is the test of what you're learning on the practice court. It is not all about the ranking points. So the reason the Southern Close would happen, even if the points don't affect ranking, is to give these kids an opportunity to flex their competitive muscle before the national hard courts.
And gain experience. And then the other side of that is that they will be doing shadow rankings coming up, starting whenever they do unfreeze it. Let's say it's September. They're going to be doing shadow rankings under the new national 7-point system, and developing those as we get to that new system. So the Southern Close is going to count towards that. It may not
the shadow rankings.
For the shadow rankings, it may not count to be selected to Kalamazoo or San Diego or wherever it is you're going for your national hard courts, but it will eventually count into there. So just to point that out.
Okay. And Markus, I mean, yes, to make money, but there's not that much money made off of a sectional close tournament. So, right?
Right.
Scott's not commenting.
I have no idea. I do not know the finances of it. Okay. I do know it costs a lot of money, and I know that they have a lot of expenses. And if you think about it, just this North Carolina Level 3 we're looking at the end of June, the expenses are changing. Okay, we're not going to have T-shirts to give out or player gifts to give out. We're not giving out awards, but the ball cost just got doubled because we're going to have to put 2 cans of balls on every court. So there's the economics of it's getting ready to change a lot.
Yeah. And I know USTA makes money off of these tournaments. I mean, they get paid. Part of the registration fee goes to USTA, and I understand that. And Markus, I get your point. Hotels and restaurants and all that. But I suspect all that's going to look very different too. And there are going to be fewer players willing to travel and where they have to stay in a hotel to play a junior tennis tournament, at least for the next few months. I suspect there will be some families that feel comfortable doing that, but there will be many others who don't. So, there's... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's very interesting. You look here in North Carolina, our Department of Health and Human Services, I looked on their website. I don't know, several days ago. And if you looked at, I think we're at just over 1,000 deaths in North Carolina from COVID. And if you look, though, at the number of deaths that are in congregated living centers, such as nursing homes, things of that nature, if you look at that, that's 70% of that 1,000. So if you take that out, and now you take I think it was 294 deaths of people in the state of North Carolina who are not in a congregated living center, and divide that by the 10.49 million people in the population, it's a 0.0029% chance. So it's not even a tenth of a percent, not even a hundredth of a percent. It's 0.00. So it was 2.9 thousandth of a percent that you would die from COVID. Now, that would be totally different than the percentage you would see in other parts of the country. But in North Carolina, when you take out the congregated living centers, it makes you start thinking about, wow, really, how much is that a huge issue? But that may be a reason why you don't go to New York City and play a tournament, or you don't go to somewhere else. So again, it's going to be different all over the country.
Yeah. And not to get political, but I'm wary of all the data I'm seeing about the numbers. So there's just been stuff coming out that those numbers are skewed to. So listen, the bottom line is do what you feel comfortable with. Your health, your family's health and safety is at the forefront of, or should be at the forefront of decision making, not junior tennis ranking points. So please don't make these decisions based on whether your child is going to have access to ranking points or not. As Scott and Markus confirmed, USTA has frozen junior rankings. So even if your child plays or doesn't play in these next couple months, it's not going to impact their ranking at all. And so that worry needs to go away. That's off the table. Okay. Scott, now we're at an hour and 16 minutes. My goodness. Thank you so much. I know you've got stuff to do.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate you. Yeah. And thank all of you for who tuned in and posted your questions and comments. I'm sorry if I didn't read all of them. Some of them were coming in pretty quickly, but I do appreciate you listening. And Scott, I think this has been really informative. So thanks for sharing.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And, who knows, we may in 30 days have a totally different situation to deal with as well. So
shoot, we may have a totally different situation next week. It's been changing by the second.
You're absolutely right.
So, all right, everybody, bottom line, stay safe and do what you feel comfortable doing for your family. The tennis will be there when you're ready to return.
Absolutely. Have fun out on the West Coast.
Thank you. Take care.